Hey friends, it's Ben with Evolving Man. This episode is about the 12 steps, 12-step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and all of the other 12-step programs that have spun out from those. I'm giving you my personal perspective on these programs, the light side, the dark side, the myths, the misnomers, and misunderstandings. I spent 15 years in that program in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and I learned deeply about it. And so I want to share that with you. This is my talk that I give to my addiction recovery clients, and I wanted to record it so that it's out there and available to the public. So check this out if you want to join a 12-step program, but you have concerns, or if you're concerned about it, or if you just want to hear my perspective on the matter. This is a long, deep dive episode. I talk about the criticisms of the program. I talk about myths. We deal with the God thing. We deal with the powerlessness thing, the disease concept. And I share about the steps and also what seems to work about the program and how to make it work for you if that's something that you're interested in. So really excited to share this with you folks. Please like, subscribe, and share it with somebody who might get something out of it. Comment with your questions and concerns or criticisms below. Would love to have a little bit of conversation about this. If you have more questions or things that you'd like me to add to this conversation, drop those below. And if you want to work with me, if you're a man who is interested in joining my Freedom from Addiction Circle, it's an online circle, small group that meets with me. I coach guys in a circle now. I don't do so much one-on-one. This is a group of guys using accountability, goals, and fire and love at the same time to get each other sober and get themselves sober. Freedom from Addiction Circle. I'll drop a link below. Okay, folks, enjoy this episode. Hey, friends, we're talking about the 12 steps in this episode. This is a talk that I do for my clients from time to time. I'm an addictions counselor, an addictions coach for men. I work with guys in recovery from all different kinds of addiction. And the 12 steps and associated programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sex and Relationship Baholics Anonymous. There's many different programs, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. These programs, 12-step programs, come up a lot and people ask questions about them. I find that there's misunderstandings, myths, misnomers about this program. And when people look at it on face value, sometimes there is language, wording that can be triggering and turn people off. Other times people go to a meeting to check it out and they have an experience that turns them off and they never go back. And so I do this talk from a personal perspective, personal share, my experience in the program, which primarily was Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to Narcotics Anonymous meetings sometimes. For 15 years, I was a member of that program and went to meetings in different cities and different countries. I went to big book studies, they call it, digging deep into understanding the program and where it came from, its origins, and what some of the words mean, and digging deep into each of the steps. And in my opinion, developed a pretty good understanding of what this program is about, saw what you might call the light side and the dark side, the useful side and the not so useful side of the program, found good meetings and bad meetings, in my opinion. And I'm no longer a part of that program, although I'll still go back from time to time, go to meetings, but I don't regularly go to meetings anymore. I have a different perspective on recovery, something that is maybe larger than the perspective in the 12 steps. And so I'm sharing this information and this talk from the stance of having been deeply steeped in it for 15 years and being surrounded only by people who were in the program and then having moved out of it and had an outside perspective on it. And so I'm not going to say that I'm unbiased, but in some ways, I think my perspective is unique. And so I want to share that with the world. I don't want this to just be limited to my client sessions that I do in my Freedom from Addiction circle or with the occasional one-on-one client that I have. I want to share this with you guys. So this talk is for people who are curious about 12-step programs, skeptical, or people who are in the program and just want to know more and get my perspective on the steps, on the program, on the community that surrounds the program. And in this talk, I will go over some of the concerns, some of the criticisms of the program that people commonly have. I'll talk about the idea of powerlessness and how that can be disempowering, and try to help deal with that. The disease concept, uh, how trauma factors into this program. The big one is God and religiosity and religion, language in the program, and more. I'll also talk about the steps briefly to give, maybe not so briefly, maybe this is a deep dive, to give my perspective on what each of the steps are for. And if you're not interested in that part, you can just fast forward through it. And then I'll share some notes on why I think this program works for people. There are criticism as to why this program doesn't work for people. I might touch on those. But if, I really love understanding what is it about something that makes it work. And because then you can take that and apply it elsewhere. So I'll share a little bit on what I've learned about why it works. And then tips for any person who is entering into the program or currently in the program to get the most out of it. I was in it for 15 years. I went to many, many meetings, and I feel like I have some good understanding as to how to extract the best value from 12-step programs, because they're not going anywhere. They've been around a long time, and clearly some people are finding great benefit in them. So how do you do that without getting turned off and having a bad experience, having a bad trip, so to speak? So let's get into it. A few more pieces that I want to share is really how to avoid triggers, pitfalls, negative experiences. And I want to share some sort of caveats at the beginning that, these are my views. Some of the facts that I share might not be completely accurate. I'm not a historian, and my memory doesn't work in a way where I get just all the facts right. There's a lot of my opinion and my perspective in this talk. But the teachings, I think, are the most important piece, and that's what I like to focus on in my life. This is just one way to get clean, 12 steps. And there are many other programs out there. There's Smart Recovery. There's people developing their own programs for themselves and what might be called spontaneously getting sober, getting clean. And that's totally fine. But this program has had millions of members, and it's worldwide. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. This is something that started around 1935, right? So we're 80, coming up on 90 years soon, long time. And it's largely unchanged since then. And it's donation based, and it's applied to all different types of addiction successfully. So there's something here. And the program was also adapted for codependency. People who are affected and have been changed by the presence of an alcoholic or addict or person with an addiction in their lives, and have sort of adapted to constantly be worrying and trying to mitigate risk and fix or heal an addict in their life. And that is its own kind of illness that can sort of take over. And my parents still go to that program. Al-Anon is the one for alcoholism, but it doesn't. It really applies to anyone who has a person with an addiction in their life, or who has the behaviors of codependency. I'm not going to touch on the codependency piece in this talk. I'm going to give more of an overview of AANA and those types of programs. But it's been very successful, the Al-Anon program as well. So this program was written in 1935, and I want to just do a brief overview on the God thing before I get into the steps, and before I get into the criticisms. The God thing, when you read the steps, you'll see the word God with a big G, and the word Him, referring to God as Him. So it's clearly like a Christian or Catholic perspective. And in 1935, in America, Bill W. was the guy who was formulating and trying to put together these steps and finding what was working while he was trying to get sober. All the spiritual language at the time in his culture was Christian. There was no Christian or Catholic, right? There was no Eastern way or New Age spirituality. It didn't really exist. So you have to understand that that's kind of like where he was coming from. But the guy was clearly open-minded. If you read the program, if you read what's called the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the Alcoholics Anonymous text, which again is largely unchanged. The first part of it, the first book, the first half of the book has basically not been altered in almost 90 years. If you read that, you can see that the man is really open-minded and that he was constantly looking for, like, it didn't matter. What only mattered was what worked to him. And whatever God you choose was totally fine, as long as that God works for you. And you can see that language in that book. And you can see that language in the program. And you could see that in Bill W.'s behavior and how he allowed the organization to evolve, and how they created these 12 traditions to try to keep it running well. And even how Bill W. himself tried LSD and, had a spiritual experience and wanted that to become a part of the program somehow, to facilitate spiritual experiences for people. That's a very open-minded stance. And this is how he was. And so you need to understand that the God thing, if you've got an issue with the Catholic Church or Christianity or Western religion, which many people do, this program can still work for you. You need to hear that. I'm not a Western religion guy. When I joined the program, I just sort of like took whatever had been shared with me when I was younger. And I was like, okay, God in the sky, and I'm going to pray to Him. I'm going to ask for help. And then sometimes I get it. And that's proof of the existence of God. And it works for me, And if that's your thing, great. This will work well for you. If that's not your thing, you need to read deeper into the language of higher power, power outside yourself, and just be open-minded to the fact that this is not a religious organization, that they're not trying to get you to go to church, and that you need to find what works for you within this. It's a spiritual program. And I guess I would argue every person has the capacity to be spiritual. And I believe that every person is a spirit in a body. It's like the embodiment of spirit, you could say. It's more of an Eastern perspective. So everyone has the capacity to be spiritual and to have a connection to the greater unknown, the thing bigger than us, that where we all come from, Mother Nature, the universe, the unseen, the creator, right? We all have the capacity to connect to that. We may not feel that capacity. We may say, oh, I'm not a spiritual person. But that's like saying I'm not a dancer. I don't dance. I don't know how to dance. I believe everyone knows how to dance, and everyone is a dancer. So it's just a matter of like putting yourself in that position to dance, and working those edges, and starting to play in that space. So it's possible to make this program work for you. At one point, I broke down my own perspective of higher power. I decided I was an atheist, and I spent a solid year as an atheist, and the program was still working for me because I was still using the higher powers that I had created other than God in the sky. And so it was working for me. And then I started working my way towards Eastern perspectives. I read A New Earth and some New Age stuff, and started getting into Buddhist perspectives. And that sort of transformed my understanding, and it still worked. It works better for me now because it's more me. So that's the God thing. If you hate the term God, there's an acronym they share in some of the programs, 12-step programs, that you can replace with God, and it's group of drunks. This would be in Alcoholics Anonymous. They share this group of drunks. God is just group of drunks. And so you can make the whole program your higher power. And sort of, well, we'll talk about what that means when we get to the steps. But the point is, it does work without religion. Okay, I'm going to go through the steps. I'm going to read through the steps here, and I'm going to give some short tips and perspectives on what the steps are for, how they serve, try to clear up any misunderstandings that you might see on the surface, and get to like what the deeper layers of the steps are. And then from there, we'll go into the criticisms of the program, and then I'll share why I think the program works, and how to get the most out of it. Okay. So if you don't want to hear about the steps, you can fast forward through this piece. Okay. The first 3 steps are the foundation of the program. Step 1, 2, and 3. The principles behind, there's a principle behind each step. And honestly, if you focus on these 12 principles behind the 12 steps in your life and just focus on those, like you're going to have a great life. Step 1 is about honesty. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, and that our lives had become unmanageable is the general way of reading this step. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they say alcohol, and in Narcotics Anonymous, they say addiction. So this step is about surrender, hitting bottom. I can't do this on my own. This is, as Russell Brand would say, I'm fucked, right? This admission, like I've gone too far. I've hit bottom. I can't do this anymore, right? It's painful. It's that painful admission that leads us to the doors of a program or a treatment center or an addiction counselor or what have you. And I would say there are layers to step 1. There's, saying it, yep, I am an alcoholic, I am an addict, or I have lost control. Addiction is characterized by the loss of control over something, right? I think that's important to be clear, because people who use the word addiction all the time, oh, I'm addicted to this I'm addicted to coffee. If I don't have my coffee, I'm angry, But addiction isn't that. It's more than that. There's always withdrawal, a withdrawal symptom, right? So you're angry when you don't have coffee. That's withdrawal, but that's definitely a sign of dependency, which is a different thing. But an addiction causes harm to your life, like real harm. And so there's negative feedback. There are consequences coming, and yet you're continuing to use. There's compulsion, continued use despite negative consequences, withdrawal, loss of control. That's addiction. So with coffee, for instance, yeah, like your body needs it. You become dependent on it. You get headaches if you don't have it. You get cranky. But the continued use of coffee, is it harming your life? Is it causing negative consequences in your life, like real ones? Not just like it takes time to go get a coffee, or sometimes you drink too much and you get the runs, or you get the shakes, right? That's a very minor symptom, right? So addiction is real heavy consequences in a person's life that I guess they get heavier over time, right? They progress. They progress. They get worse and worse if the addiction doesn't get dealt with. And so there's an unmanageability and a loss of control over your life. And so there's saying I'm addicted, and then there's like really feeling, oh yeah, I don't know what else to do. I have fully lost control. And I think there's just layers to that emotional reality of really surrendering to that fact, because people will say like, oh yeah, I can't do this on my own anymore. But then they will continue to do it on their own. Right. And then something worse will happen. And then the reality becomes more clear. And then something worse will happen. Maybe you've seen this in your life or someone else's life. And finally, when the pain becomes so great and the big bad thing happens, that's sometimes the wake up call that really pushes a person through to step 2, which is to actually reach out for help. Okay, yeah, I really am screwed and I cannot do this on my own and I need help. And so step 2 is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Really what that is I need help. I need help. I can't do this on my own. I need help. And so I'm just going to go back to step 1 and talk about this issue of powerlessness. When people look at that, there's a criticism there around disempowering people and telling them that they can't get better. And, if you're powerless, if you're totally powerless, how are you supposed to recover? And I think it's just not understanding the nuance of what this means. Like, if you have an addiction, you have lost control. And part of the denial system that occurs when you have an addiction is almost like a parasite or a virus in the mind that like wants you to keep doing it, even though it's bad for you and even though it might eventually lead to your death or imprisonment or institutionalization. And so you've got that going on. Your mind actually wants you, your addiction actually wants you to think that you haven't lost control and that it's not an issue. And then you can continue doing whatever you're doing. And so that's it's just one of the basic things that happens in addiction. And so this step 1 is the talk about powerlessness is like, hey, the real admission that you have lost control, that you have an addiction. It's not that you never can get better and that you always will have to give all of your power away. You're powerless. Now come to us and we will save you. Come to our cult and we will take care of you. That's not what it is. It's just the admission that you are screwed, that you're on your own, and that you need help, right? And yes, you've lost a majority of your quote willpower. Willpower doesn't get you clean, really. But you still always have some choice left in your life, right? No one's 100% powerlessness. No one's 100% powerless over everything in their lives. You have some choice, and you have some choice as to whether to reach out for help, whether to really admit that you've lost control and seek out a program of recovery. And the people that do that do recover. So yes, there's an admission of powerlessness here, but this program is actually meant to empower you by keeping your denial in check and helping you remember, like, hey, you have lost control and you can lose control again if you're not adhering to a structure and getting the help that you need, right? So that's the piece on powerlessness. So step 1 is, I can't do this on my own. Step 2 is, they can, or he can, or she can, or whatever my higher power is, can help me. There is help out there, and it's outside of me. I need to go out into the world. I need to go into rooms and learn from people. I need to maybe get a sponsor. Maybe I need to pray to something bigger than me and get out of my shell that I've created for myself in my addiction. This sort of like very tiny room that an addiction creates for you. I need to get out of that. I need to reach out. Okay, that's what step 2 is about. And the sanity piece is really just a reference to the fact that addiction is quite insane. It's a self-destruct program that's running that, if it goes uninterrupted, it will destroy your life. And that's quite insane. But that you can be restored to sanity. You can come back. So in step 2, a person needs to focus on finding higher power or higher powers that work for them. And the function piece is asking for help. And I learned that when I was in treatment. I was in treatment for 13 months when I was a teenager. And they sort of tested me 2 weeks into step 2 and tested me to see if I would ask for help under pressure. And I failed. And I was quite embarrassed because they were asking me something that I didn't know, and I wouldn't acknowledge that I didn't know. And I just sort of fought them, the counselors. And they're like, hey, you need to acknowledge that you don't know everything. Quit being a know-it-all and ask for help. And that was a big lesson for me. I'll never forget it. Step 3 is, I forgot to mention the principle behind step 2, hope. So honesty, hope. And then step 3 is faith. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Ooh, spooky step. That sounds culty, doesn't it? Hey, you're going to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, particularly if you're not a Christian or a Catholic person. This can be freaky. But what this is, just to rewind back to step 1, I can't. Step 2, they can, or the program can. Step 3 is, I'm going to let them. I'm going to do it. I'm going to join. So I can't do this. Oh, there is a solution, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to turn my life over. I'm going to spend some time in this program and commit to do it. Okay, so that the first 3 steps are foundational in this way. It's like setting, if you can imagine building the foundation of a house. It's the concrete and the hole digging, then the concrete forming, so that the frame of the house can be built on top of it. You need a good foundation. And that's what these steps are. It's like, hey, I need help. There is help out there, and I'm going to do the help. I'm going to take the help. Okay. So it's a commitment. Step 3 is a commitment. There's no real action necessarily taken in these first 3 steps. I mean, hopefully you're like going to some meetings or something, but it's a very internal process. And step 3 is just making a decision. It says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over. So part of that is, for instance, when you want to drink or you want to use, normally what you would do is do that. You'd go use. And turning your will and your life over means, instead of doing that, I'm actually going to call somebody. I'm going to call a friend, or I'm going to go to a meeting, or I'm going to get out of the environment that I'm in and get safe so that I'm not at risk of using, if you're in some place where you're triggered. Okay. So that's turning your will and your life over, because the program and your higher powers will always advocate for you to not drink or use, to get out of places that are high risk, and to reach out for help. And so that's what you're doing in those moments. Okay. The next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the next 6 steps are basically this like house cleaning. It's the deeper work that needs to be done to clean out your past, do an inventory of what's going on in your life, and try to remedy some of what's occurred, some of your habits, some of your personality traits, looking at your dark side and trying to clean that up. So step 4 is about courage, and it's making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And so what you do in this step is you write down, there's different ways to do this. This is how we did it when I was in treatment. You write down all of your resentments that you've ever had in your life, all the people that you resented, the Billy that hit you when you were a kid, all of the stuff that you resent in your mother and your father and your brother and your sister and your uncle and your grandpa, your teachers, people who didn't give you what you want, people who, harmed you, traumatized you, women or men or boys or girls who you were attracted to who didn't reciprocate, all of the resentments you ever had in your life. So really, most of the significant people in your life will go on this list. I had 45 pages of resentments with about 10 on each page. And ideally, you actually write down, where those resentments came from, whether it was a security thing or whether it was a social thing or whether it was a sexual thing, and break down, what's behind the resentment as well. Like, was it selfishness? Was there dishonesty? Was there inconsiderateness on your part? This is one way to do it. And so you write down all those things. And if you're being extra diligent, you write down all of your shameful sex conduct in your life, and you write down all of your harms done to other people, just to sort of, in a way, balance out all those resentments, all that anger you have towards others. It's all the shit you are holding, basically. Everything you've been holding in your life that's significant, you're writing it all down. And the harms you write down, you save for step 8. And we'll get to that. So you're writing your list in step 4, and it's ownership. It's about diligent self-searching, and it's about putting pen to paper. This can be a very hard step for people, and it can bring up all their stuff. And you're definitely at risk for relapse in these times. And so you have to be in a bubble where you're mitigating risk as best you can while you're doing this, and you're not procrastinating. You're getting it done. Some people will quote, sit on their lists for months, and it just prolongs the pain. They share in the book that this is kind of hey, if you were running a store and you had all these things in your store, every store has to do inventory and find out what's on the shelf and what's not, and what's selling and what's not selling, and then adjust. And we have to do that inside of our own lives, in our character and in our actions, looking at our behaviors. And that most people don't actually do this kind of thing, but that for alcoholics and addicts, this is very, very useful. I've heard it said that if you can get through step 4 and 5, you greatly increase your chances of staying clean, because you've done this sort of cleaning internally. No pun intended. So that's step 4. Step 5 is when you sit down with a trusted person who ideally knows how to lead a person through the 5th step, and you share everything that's on your step 4 lists. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. That's how the step is written. And the principle is integrity. This is like confession, and ideally you're sitting with someone for 4 to 12 hours and you're telling them everything. And people do step 5s in different ways. The way that I have done them, I've done my own step 5s and then I've led other people through them, is you book a whole day and you find a place that feels like really sacred and confidential, maybe a fire, or like I've done a couple in a teepee, and you kind of go through the person's entire life and you listen to the significant events, the resentments, and you start connecting patterns. You connect the patterns of what happened as a child and how they carried through teen life and then how they came into adult life, and identify the core traits that that person has that are harming them. Selfishness, as I mentioned earlier, inconsiderateness, dishonesty, lying, lack of control over their anger, self-destructive patterns, right? Sabotage, self-sabotage. And a lot of people do this either with their sponsor, if their sponsor has a lot of experience, and we'll talk about sponsorship, or there are these places where there's chaplains and not necessarily priests, but ordained ministers who just do step 5s with people, and they do hundreds and thousands of them. So they're trusted people for you to just dump your shit on, and they can give you some good reflections. So where I went through recovery, there was a place outside of town that did this, place called Mount St. Francis, I believe, outside Calgary. So that's an intense thing. Step 5, you have to book it with somebody, and with somebody who you trust with your secrets. And ideally in there, you talk about all your resentments, all your harms done to other people, all your shameful sex conduct. Let all those secrets out. They call it like cleaning the skeletons out of your closet, like cleaning out the bodies, right? So that you don't have to carry them around all the time, because that closet follows you around everywhere you go. And man, it's not worth carrying all those things. They don't have to be locked up in there. Whatever you've done in your life, whatever bad things you've done in your life, somebody else has also done those things, and somehow found a way to forgive themselves, change, do differently, help others, give back, and try to create healing in the world, right? We've all done bad stuff, and we've all hurt other people, and we've all done things that we're ashamed of. And keeping those secrets, actually, what they say in the program, keeps us sick. Keeping secrets keeps us sick. That always stuck with me. And you want to talk about honesty, step 1. There's a layer of honesty that a lot of people never get to, is telling somebody everything. All the darkest, most shameful things that you've ever done, right? But that's the level that honesty can go to. And I've seen it hundreds of times. And I've seen the liberation that occurs in people, and the freedom. So step 5, big one. Step 6 is about willingness. We were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So this is really about becoming ready to rid yourself of the things that you identify, the patterns that you identify in step 5. The word defects of character is can be also triggering, like defective person. But really, this is looking at your light and your dark side, and the sides of you that, when you're not showing up well, when you're being selfish, when you're being dishonest, when you're acting from a wounded place, you could say, right? and being willing to change those patterns and forming that intention to change those patterns. And then in a way, like giving that willingness up to your higher power, like, God, whoever you are, I am ready to not be such a selfish bastard. I am ready to stop lying to myself and to other people when I'm feeling ashamed about something, or when I've done something that I don't like, or that other people would disapprove of. I'm not going to hide those things anymore. I am willing to just be honest at all costs and be selfless and give more to others. That willingness, that claiming that. Okay. That's what step 6 is about. And step 7 is asking for the power to shift those patterns. So it's humility is the principle. We humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So it's this practice of practicing letting go. So let's say you have seen that you're actually really selfish and self-serving in many of your behaviors, many of your interactions. If you want to spend some time on step 7, you practice being selfless in your life, and maybe you set goals for doing something selfless each day, going and doing something for someone else, doing an inventory each day of like all the ways that you were selfish and all the ways that you were selfless, and trying to edge towards that selfless side, right? This is what 6 and 7 are about. And if one of your patterns in step 5 was, getting into relationships that were not healthy for you in one way or another, with abusive people, or with people that you want to take advantage of, step 6 and 7 is also about being willing to change that pattern and end those relationships and not begin new ones that have the same red flags, right? Step 6 and 7 don't get a lot of airtime in the Alcoholics Anonymous text. And I think it's a relatively simple concept, but when I went through treatment, they made you spend 2 weeks on each step. And I think that was pretty useful. They do get a little bit more space in what's called the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book. And they're worth spending more time on, because this is like character shaping. And it's something that I do in my men's groups. And, we do goals and accountability, and, what do you want to shift in your life, and how can you practically spend some time on that? Is very important. Okay. Step 8 is about, I believe the principle of step 8 is brotherly love, which is like, community love, loving each other, right? We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. This one can be tough. First of all, most of us have harmed a lot of people in big and small ways, and we really probably don't even have a scope of all the people we've harmed. I've definitely harmed more people than I can write a list of. And what you do is you take that list of all the people you've harmed, and you go through each one and you decide, am I willing to make amends to this person now, later, or never? There's going to be people on that list that you're clamoring to make amends to. You're just ready. And then there's people who like, that conversation is going to be uncomfortable. And then there's people on that list who have maybe harmed you, and you are still resentful at them, and you feel like they don't deserve your amends. And that's a tough one to hold on to, because if you have harmed that person, there's some unfinished business there that you're not willing to clean up. And so in step 8, you make that list, and you kind of meditate on that list, and you work on this idea of becoming willing to make amends to everyone for you, not for them. I mean, they may benefit, but they also may reject your amends. If amends isn't necessarily saying I'm sorry, but it's owning your actions and committing to be different. And hopefully by the time you're at step 8, you already have been behaving differently in your life. You're ripping less people off, you're stealing less, you're being more honest because honesty was the first step. And you're living in a principled way by the time you get to step 8. And so hopefully you have a little bit of a history to lean on, and say like, yeah, I am changing my life, and I was this way with you. I showed up this way with you, and I'm committing to not show up that way for anyone else again. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm not happy with how I behaved. And if there's any way I can make it up to you, I want to do that. Just this willingness to clean your side of the street up, regardless of what that person did. And I have to say that these amends conversations, when people go into them, they're very difficult, but I can't tell you how many times people have had amazing things happen. Amazing conversations and reconnections occur. And sometimes you get doors slammed in your face and you get people who say, I'm not ready. I don't want to talk to you. And in that case, you've done what you can, right? Particularly in step 8, it's just about the willingness, right? So in step 9, discipline, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So this is the dirty work, the mopping up, eating crow, sitting in front of people and admitting your wrongs, and maybe even listening to them about the other ways that you may have hurt them that you didn't know. And it's asking for forgiveness and not necessarily getting it from people. Very hard. Like you sort of have to hold space in this step for other people. But it is about forgiveness, and not necessarily about getting forgiveness from other people. It's about learning to forgive yourself through all of this. How can you forgive yourself for the things that you've done to others, even if they won't forgive you? Because the benefit of doing so is you don't have to carry shame and just the weight of that, right? Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean condoning behavior. It just means letting go of the resentment of whatever that is, right? So it's a powerful step, and it's a meditation on this spiritual principle that is forgiveness. There's a lot of questions I think that maybe come up for people when I talk about this, like, what about the person that raped me, or the person that killed my mother, or the drunk driver that hit my kid, or these like tragedies. And that's a whole other thing. There's a lot of depth to this idea of forgiveness, but maybe you did some of those things, right? And how could you forgive yourself for those things? Well, maybe the best thing that you could do is clean your life up and live in a good way and give back for the rest of your life to people who feel the most meaningful, right? Maybe that's forgiveness. So that's the end of the cleaning your house steps, which, as you can see, aren't easy. And you can understand why some people don't get through all 12 steps. They want to jump ship. So it's important throughout all this to keep going to meetings, to meet with a sponsor, and to talk about your reservations, because it's not easy. So steps 10, 11, and 12 are sometimes referred to as maintenance steps. So this is stuff that you can do every day for the rest of your life. Step 10 is about perseverance. We continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So the personal inventory piece is 4 and 5, 6 and 7. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it is 8 and 9. And so you're basically repeating those cleaning house steps, but in a daily routine. And so you'd be able to find PDF downloads online that are like a daily inventory checklist. Did I stay sober today? Did I, go to a meeting? Did I do my readings? And then, the actual cleaning house part. Do I have any resentments from the day? Do I have regrets from the day? Um, did I say something that needs to be cleaned up? Did I harm somebody that I know of? Did any of my self-sabotaging behaviors come up? What was the root of those things? Do I need to make amends? If so, who do I need to make amends to, and when will I do that? That's that personal inventory. This can be very useful for people to, it is always useful for people to spend some time just doing this. Step 10, daily inventories over and over again, every day doing it. This is what I did for 2 or 3 weeks in treatment. I did the step 10 inventory. And then actually where I went to treatment, they did like a mini step 5 with you as well to like clean anything between your last 5 and where you were on step 10. Just to really dig in and really practice this process, and get the hang of it. So it's steps 4 to 9 all wrapped into one, and you can do it every day for the rest of your life, and your life will be better. That's for sure. Step 11 is about spirituality. Here's the long description of it. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So it's seeking through prayer and meditation. Interesting that they mentioned meditation here. Back in 1935, I think really to meditate really meant to like think deeply about something and just kind of like try to listen for answers, right? Whereas prayer was this sort of like asking. Prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. So it's this like nurturing of the relationship with the greater unknown. And in terms of what you're praying for and asking for, knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So it's, what will you have me do? And whatever your will is for me, please give me the power to do that. Give me the power to serve, right? This is a very powerful stance to take. Instead of like, give me what I want, gimme, gimme, gimme. It's, what is my calling? And please tell me what my calling is, today. And what direction shall I go today? I'm listening. And, praying for, may I have the power to do that and to serve, right? So it's nurturing a spiritual connection. And this is a process that's never complete, but it's arguably one of the most important steps in this whole thing, the spiritual relationship. It says towards the end of the basic text in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, it says there is no cure for addiction. We don't have a cure, but what we do have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So what that is saying is, if you work on your spiritual connection and your spiritual condition, however you can assess what your spiritual health is, if you're working on that in a good way, you have insulation and insurance against relapse. Okay. So keep working on your spiritual connection, the things that make you feel most alive and uplifted and connected to others and connected to the universe. And that's your path. That's what I like to work on with guys in my practice. So not much more to say about step 11, but it's definitely the thing to continue after you're done the 12 steps. Okay. Step 12, last one, service. I'll read the text. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Okay, practice the principles in all the affairs makes plenty of sense. Like honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, willingness, humility, love, discipline, perseverance, spirituality, and service. Makes perfect sense. Try to practice those principles in all your affairs. carry this message to other addicts. This is a reference to service. There's something that happens when we try to share what we've learned and what's been given to us with other people. It levels up our understanding of the program that we went through, of the path that we went through, and it breathes new life into that for us. But there's also this just uplifting energy that a person gets when they're helping others. Bill W., when he was forming the program and writing writing the steps, refining them, that, there was 5 and then there was 9 and then there was, I don't know if there was 13, but eventually it ended up being 12. He was trying to get other alcoholics sober in his town, and he was bringing them into his home and sobering them up and then trying to get them to stay sober. And for 6 months, he brought people into the home. He was married. His wife was like, okay, okay. And for 6 months, he did that, and he didn't get one person sober. He didn't have all of the ingredients right yet. And he was disillusioned with that process. There's a story where he's sharing about his disillusionment and just feeling beat up by the process with his wife. And his wife said to him, "You've stayed sober. These entire 6 months, you've been sober. So something you're doing is working for you." And from what I understand, that's when he had a breakthrough about this need to give back. Like I said before, addiction is this, it creates this it's a selfish process. You're just constantly concerned with your own addictive process. Give me that dopamine, baby, and you're on the dopamine train. And this process of trying to help someone else in a way gets you off of that. Like you do get off on helping other people, but it's this very sort of pure, uplifting feeling that actually gets you out of your own selfishness. And so service is a big part of some of the AA groups, to more effect in some than others. There's volunteer run meetings, and there's positions inside of the meetings where a person, there's a person who's got to have the keys to the building. There's a person who collects the donations, and a person who brings the books and the literature to the meeting. But I went to Hawaii once, and I went to a bunch of AA meetings there, and I found that at those meetings, they had all of these other opportunities for service. Like they had cups and cutlery, and people brought food, and there was all of this like setup that occurred in the meetings, and there was people designated for each element of the setup and the takedown and outreach, to the community. Like there was all of these elements, and I saw how involved everyone was because of that. Because it's like they have all these like 15 positions they need to fill. It's like, hey, who's doing this today? Who's doing that? And all of those things are service. It's like people giving back and practicing that. Very, very useful. So it keeps you in the recovery game, and it helps you remember that you're never done growing. When you're constantly dealing with the people who are new in the program and trying to help them and seeing the consequences of addiction as they sort of come in, you're reminded of your own bottom and your own dark place that you came from. And that in itself can keep a person sober too. Just that daily reminder. So it's this idea of like, hey, don't get sober and then go isolate on your own and forget where you came from. That's what they say. Don't forget where you came from. Like remember where that was, and not to live from fear, but to just be smart about. Addiction has this denial aspect where we want to forget that, oh yeah, it wasn't so bad, and like, maybe I can use again, maybe I can use normally, right? And then off we go, we relapse. So it's this attempt to keep people in the game. Okay, so that, friends, is the 12 steps. So the last piece I'll mention about step 12 is the first text there, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. That's important. So what they're saying is that the steps can create an awakening for a person, a spiritual experience that changes them fundamentally. And that happens for people at different times. Sometimes it'll happen in step 1. Sometimes it'll happen on the step 5 call. They talk about in the book these sort of like God moments that people have where it's like, phew, that's the spiritual experience. But there's also a thing called spiritual awakening. And this is in the back of the book in an appendix. And basically it's a waking up that occurs over time as you learn that there's a different way of life. And there's all this like aha energy going on. And all of a sudden you feel like you're floating and like, oh my God, there's a way out. There's a way out of this prison I was in. That's a spiritual awakening in some cases, you could say. So the spiritual awakening piece is important. And if you haven't had one yet and you want to, I would say keep going through the steps, focus on step 11 and find your spirituality, and you will eventually have something that feels like a spiritual awakening. I've had many in my life as I've tried all the different things, sweat lodges and breath work and all the things, right? But yeah, one of the pieces I'll touch on again one more time is that, you know, Bill W was really passionate about this spiritual awakening thing, and he did do LSD at some point. It's well documented. And he wanted to make this a part of the program. He brought that to the board because at the time there was a board governing AA and making sure that it sort of grows in the right way. And they weren't having it. They weren't having the introduction of LSD. It was too controversial and I suppose scary for them. And in hindsight, yeah, maybe that's a good decision. I'm not anti psychedelics. I'm actually pro psychedelics in many cases, but it has to be done. It has to be done under the right conditions and at the right time for a person. And I always advocate that people get sober and go through this program for a few years before touching any substance that can alter your mind. There's tremendous value in those things, but the behavior modification and the hard work that occurs in this program, where you go to meetings and you clean your house and you practice the inventory and you be of service and you nurture your spiritual connection on your own in your quiet space and the solitude of your own mind, that's powerful work. And it cannot be skipped. It cannot be skipped. So I'll touch on some criticisms and then why the program works and then some tips for engaging in the program. Okay. Criticisms. Powerlessness, I already touched on. That language can sound disempowering, but it's not meant to be disempowering. It's actually meant to be empowering. Because when you think you don't have a problem and you actually do, that's disempowering because you're blind. You're in the dark on your own illness. When you realize what you've got going on, that's empowering. And addiction is loss of control, powerlessness. So if you're willing to admit that to yourself and other people, your head's above water now. You're not drowning anymore. So it is empowering. Free will versus powerlessness, this idea of like, oh, I already talked about this. You always have some will. And so what I like to work with people on and remind people of is maybe you are a mostly programmed robot with 98% predetermination. You just sort of unconsciously make your decisions and move through life. Maybe so. I actually kind of believe that. But I also believe that you maybe have 1 or 2% of will that you can exercise to steer this big heavy ship that is you, this big complex computer that is you moving through the world. You can steer it slowly, decision by decision in your life. And that's what you're working with in this program. You're edging yourself towards recovery and spiritual health. And so that's it. The disease concept. Some people they take issue with the fact that AA sees addiction, or 12-step programs see addiction as a disease, and that can be disempowering and pigeonholing. And it could be. It certainly could be. Certainly if a person chooses to put all of their stock, all of their money into the disease bag, I am a diseased person and I will never get better. And all the stigma that might come with having a disease, particularly, addiction. But it's not meant for that, and you don't have to take it that way. You don't have to take on the disease concept as though you are doomed and as though that's all that you are. It can be an empowering concept that, this fits the bill of an illness and there's a treatment. And it's not a pill or an elixir. It's a program of living, and it's a spiritual program. That's how I see it. And there are plenty of good arguments for why addiction fits the bill for disease, in terms of like the brain being the primary organ that's being affected. And I have seen many people, when they read the disease concept, they feel so relieved. They go, "Oh, this is amazing, because this means I'm not doomed, and that I don't have to walk around in shame about who I am and what I've done. I did these things because I'm sick in some way, and I can get better." So this can be very empowering. It really just depends how you want to look at it. Okay. Another criticism that people say is that the program doesn't necessarily address underlying trauma. And I would agree. It's not built for that. This program is not built for addressing the underlying trauma. That's such a complex issue. And I would also say that, first I would say that's each person's journey to take on, because there's definitely a bunch of different modalities for dealing with trauma. And they're really just been emerging over the last 10 years. And so I would say, A, do this program, and then B, go to therapy, do psychedelics at the right time, do breath work, find somatic therapy, do EMDR, right? Whatever feels like the right direction for you, and address that trauma. I would also argue sometimes people think, if you address the trauma, the addiction will vaporize. It'll be gone, because the trauma is the underlying issue. And I agree that the trauma is often the underlying issue with addiction. I agree with Gabor Mate in this respect. But humans are also animals, and we have we have pathways in our brain and the way that we operate that get carved in, and we are creatures of habit. And when you behave a certain way for years and years and years, and you go to a certain place whenever you're stressed for years and years and years, you can address the trauma, but you still have a tendency to go that path when you're stressed, trauma or no trauma. And you have to alter the path that you take when you're stressed, when you're feeling emotions. And that's what this program is for. It is, in a way, behavior management. And we all have to do that, as well as doing the deeper healing work. I truly believe that. So that's the piece on trauma. Could definitely go much deeper on trauma, but I won't at the moment. The sponsorship model is unreliable and imperfect, where you have unreliable people supporting other people in their recovery, which in many ways their life hinges on. What this is speaking to is that, like, the sponsorship is like, new guy comes into AA, asks some guy who's been there a little bit longer than him, hey, will you take me through the steps and guide me through the program? And he says, yeah. And then the guy he asks relapses or disappears or doesn't show up, right? It's kind of like this idea of the blind leading the blind. And that is a problem. And I have seen guys get female sponsors and then they sleep with them, or vice versa. You get these sexual relationships that happen, or a power exchange. But the most common one is the sponsor, disappears or relapses. It's not that common. It's definitely not the norm. Most people have good experiences with their sponsors, but as always, you need to find someone who's a really good fit for you long term. But I guess what I would say is, as with all things, like, you need to figure out how to get your needs met within the system. And so what I tell men is, when you get into the program, go to men's groups. There tends to be, for whatever reason, a deeper level of honesty when men are in a group alone, and more sort of like down to earth brass tacks, not so much performative sharing in these circles. And there's often guys with longer clean time in men's circles. I don't know what it's like in the women's meetings. It's probably the same. Go to a men's meeting, find what's called the old timers, a guy who's got 20 years, 25 years, who says some stuff that you respect and has a level of, maybe you want a guy who's tough. Maybe you want a guy who can make you laugh. There's personality alignment for sure to take into account, but choose someone who you think can really support you in your recovery and ask them to be your sponsor. And if you want extra insurance, get two. That's the best way to do it. Don't just go in and ask any old Joe Schmo to be your sponsor and hold your life in their hands, right? And don't make your sponsor your higher power. There could be a higher power, but you need more than that, because your sponsor might die in a car crash tomorrow, right? Sorry, it's just the truth. And so if you're not going to have a spiritual God in the sky, or God within all of us that is your higher power, you want to designate that status to multiple things: your group, your book, your higher power, or your sponsor, maybe even your therapist, right? And use the amalgamation of all of those as your higher power. Okay. Judgment and cultiness in the community. 12-step programs are like these little villages, and they're all of the things that can happen in a little village happen in these AA or NA or what have you meetings. And you get people who are bossy, who want to tell everyone what to do, people who take up more space, too much space, this sort of like culty behavior where people are sort of like ousted if they relapse, or if they're not obeying some of the rules. Like, in AA, you get these guys who are like, reject someone who's there who is still smoking pot or something. You get some of the worst of the things that happen with religion and religiosity and fundamentalism. Fundamentalism occurs in 12-step programs as well. What people who are called like big book thumpers. They're just like, they're so hardcore about the program. It's like hard to listen to them or hard to be around. And they've always got something to say. You get people who tell you how to be and criticize you, and or reject you when you relapse, right? And I think there's probably people listening to this who have had that experience or seen that happen. And that is what happens when you have people interfacing with a program that is, pretty well set up. You have problems. And there's this argument about religion all the time. It's like, is the religion the issue or is it the people, right? And I've been on both sides of that argument. So I guess what I want to say is find the groups that feel clean in that way, that don't feel so dogmatic, and that are, let's say, open-minded, and find the people who feel that way as well. People who aren't just going to throw you under the bus if you don't think like them, that are compassionate and understanding and curious about others. Find those groups and those people. Steer away from fundamentalism. Listen to the fundamentalists, because those guys will they study the literature deeply, and they'll share secrets with you about the program that are, interesting. But I don't encourage people to get on the fundamentalist train about anything, really. It's always helpful to see multiple sides of things, but don't stand on the outside either. There's people who refuse to get in with both feet on something because they want to be an observer, and that's just a coping mechanism and a way of being avoidant and not actually having to do your work. So get in there and do the program is what I would say as well. Just do your program and make it real for you. Challenge yourself, go deep, and do your program. Find your meeting. Find your meetings, right? I've been to lots of meetings that kind of just didn't resonate that well. But I also found meetings where I was like, wow, this feels like home. There's a level of honesty in here and realness that feels so good. So that's that. I already talked about religion and Christianity and that type of thing, the God thing. And the last one, somebody asked about the term addiction being useful or unhelpful. I also touched on that in terms of just understanding what addiction really is. It's important to understand what addiction really is and not conflate it with simple habits or dependency. And there's also people who think that it's harmful to use the word addict or alcoholic because it pigeonholes people and makes it seem like that's all that they are. And I don't really subscribe to that either. If a person is white or black or Jewish or homosexual, they are not just that thing, or a man or a woman, right? A person is more than just one of those labels. And if a person feels harmed when I call them an addict with them present or to their face or whatever, I will acknowledge that and call them something different. But in general, to use that term, I think it's really just, there's this term in relationship work. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think that's important. If you're painting a brush that is negative across all people who suffer from addiction and using the word addict, it's not going to have a good ring to it, and people aren't going to feel good about it. That makes sense. But that it's how you're saying it. That's what I believe. And I think spending too much time in that place about bad words and good words and words that hurt people and words that don't hurt people is kind of the wrong focus. We all need a level of insulation and ability to hear perspectives that might hurt and hear the teaching within that and lean on that rather than trying to correct everyone's vocabulary so that it doesn't hurt anyone's feelings. So that's how I feel about the term addict. I try not to use it all the time outside of my addiction circles, when I'm talking with my guys that I work with. But yeah, I'm not as concerned about it as some people. Let's just say that. Okay. Why the program works. So why, like, what is it about this program that works? One time I went to a conference on addiction and mental health, and I went to a talk from a statistician who shared, he went out and tried to gather he talked to a lot of different people about what impacted them in the program and what worked for them and what was the highest rating for them in terms of impact on their lives. And he was trying to find the thing of it, and interviewed thousands of people. And through all of that, what he found was that there was two things that bubbled up to the top that made the program work. One was the program, the practicing of the program, going through the steps is one of the highest factors in what changes people and what works about it. So there's something about the program and doing it. That makes sense. The program doesn't even have to be perfect to change people's lives. They just have to do it. There's so many programs out there, and so many of them have changed so many people's lives. You just have to do something different than what you're doing, right? I've said to people a few times that, like, sometimes we're so embedded in our own selfishness, dishonesty, and considerateness that we're really not great at directing our own lives and making decisions. We're so invested in those things that if we were to just hand over the controls to any well-meaning person, that they might run our lives better than we can in the beginning, right? And I believe that's true, because if I could take my friend over here and run his life for him, I would balance everything, and I would make sure he's self-caring, and I would make sure he's sleeping well, and I'd make sure he's playing a little bit, and I would just sort of like put all the right ingredients in there and adjust as necessary. And there wouldn't be so much self-seeking, dark behaviors, you could say, the dark side. And so the practicing of the program is doing this thing that, it's a new program for living. It's trying on a whole bunch of tools that maybe you haven't used before, right? The second thing is the fellowship. So that's the supportive community surrounding the program, the people in the rooms, right? Those relationships have a huge impact on people. It's the people that you're calling in the middle of the night because you're craving or you want to use. It's the people you call for support when you've had a fight or having a bad day. It's the people you meet up with at the park after work to drink soda and, slackline instead of going to the bar. And one could get sober just with the fellowship, by surrounding oneself with a group of people that are living that lifestyle and being sober. One could get sober just doing the program, but you could argue that doing both is the best way. So those are the two things that have the biggest impact: the program of recovery and the fellowship. And again, that's what I try to offer my clients is the fellowship and then us doing the work together. So I'll finish this long episode with some tips for engaging the program. Okay. First things first. Hey, that is, they have these little sayings on the walls sometimes in AA meetings and NA meetings, and that just try to like keep people on track, and first things first is one of them. It's like, focus on what's in front of you is what that's trying to say, right? So go to a variety of meetings and find ones that resonate the most. There's all kinds, there's men's meetings, women's meetings. There's meetings that focus on the steps. Others are topic discussions. There's gay meetings and straight meetings, and all kinds. Downtown meetings, not downtown meetings. Morning meetings, night meetings. Go to lots of different meetings and find the ones that resonate the most and the people that resonate the most. Okay. Even try out different 12-step programs if that's open to you, available to you. So for me, like drug of choice, alcohol and cannabis, I could say. But I went to AA in my town because I found that the fellowship and the program in AA was better. There was like more sobriety in the rooms and more wisdom. And I found that NA had like a younger vibe, which, other people went to because that's what they wanted. There was like more playfulness and they were getting together and playing volleyball and whatever, but there was less sobriety. There was more relapse and more instability. And so I stuck with AA, but you can do that. Just don't go to Overeaters Anonymous if you're not an overeater. Let's just say that. Focus on your commonality with meeting attendees rather than your differences. It's easy to go into meetings looking for ways that you don't like the people there, that you're different than them. And there's a phenomenon called terminal uniqueness, which is this like, I'm so special, I'm so unique, that addicts and alcoholics can carry with them that keeps them at a distance from the world. And we really need to work through that and find out how we are, what we have in common with other people. And so try focusing on that. How can I relate to the other people in this room rather than how am I different? Notice your mind making you different, special, better than, worse than everyone in the room, and try to drop that. That'll help you connect with the community. Get a sponsor who resonates with you. Any sponsor is better than no sponsor. But I gave some tips earlier around trying to find a sponsor with stability and someone who really knows the program and has done it before. Yeah. Ideally, you're not picking someone who is like, yeah, I've never sponsored anyone, but like, let's go for it, right? Be friends with that person. Go for coffee and pie with that person, but choose someone who's got more longevity as your sponsor. Make alterations to the program where needed. Don't alter the fundamental nature, but like I said earlier, make it your program. But don't skip steps, and don't let that specialness that I spoke about earlier to control you. Just try the program. See if you can try the program as it is. Try it on. And as you move through it, you'll find pieces, like you're putting on pieces of clothing. Step 1's a piece, step 2's a piece. Try them all on. But when you get to the end, maybe you need to make some alterations or take a piece off. But you're going to find some stuff that works really well for you if you do it that way. If you want a challenge when you're joining this program, the 12-step program, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Go to lots of different ones, like I said. But just spend that time steeping yourself in the program. You don't have to do that for the rest of your life, but get in there and understand the 12-step landscape where you live and get to know the people. Go for coffee with them, go for pie, go for tea, go for walks, and make it a lifestyle for a while. And sobriety is not easy. It's not something you create with just like an hour a week going to something. You have to change so much in your life, right? So it really takes dedication. Involve yourself. Take on a role, opening or closing the meetings, or another job that's being requested. Just get involved with the community. There's another saying in 12-step programs: once an addict, always an addict. And that one can be triggering too. Like, you're going to be an addict forever. You're doomed. I don't think that saying is meant to say that, because the program isn't meant to disempower you. What it's trying to say is you are always at risk for sliding backwards, and you do well to remember where you came from. And again, it's not about living in fear. It's about not getting ahead of yourself, taking it slow, and remembering where you came from, right? And so your due diligence in your life around your self-care and your spiritual condition, and where are you spending your time, who are you spending your time with, people who are you spending your time with, that due diligence, you've got a higher bar than most people, because the consequences of not doing those things are higher. That's what once an addict, always an addict means. It means always be in recovery, always be growing, always be seeking a deeper spiritual connection. And that's a good way to live. If you see or sense a disempowering vibe in this program, or in the people, or in the slogans, one of which I just mentioned, discard it. Or get curious about it, right? Send me a message and ask me about it. Or ask your sponsor about it, or ask someone in the meeting what it really is about. But if something's not working for you, just toss it. Okay? Try not to toss the whole program. And that includes people and certain meetings. Some are better than others, and some are more stable than others. And you just have to acknowledge that you're carving your own path here in this program, and you can do that. You can do that. Tribalism and culty vibes are present in every organized group or religion, and you don't have to join in on that. That was the last note that I had. If you are motivated to quit, religious or spiritual, and choose to attend AA and do the program for yourself, rather than being compelled to attend, there is a very good chance you will get and stay sober. I heard that said on a video that I was watching last week, and I agree. If you are motivated and you want to get the most out of this program, there's a good chance it's going to work for you. That's true. So I think that is a good place to end. Those are my thoughts on the 12 steps. I'm sure that people will have questions or criticisms, or even testimonials about the program. And so if you have an opportunity to comment, if you're watching on YouTube or listening somewhere where there's a comment section, please contribute to the conversation. And thank you for participating in this conversation just by listening or watching this. And I hope this helps people understand the program better, get more out of it. And I hope it was useful to hear from someone who spent many years in the program and who isn't in there now. I don't go to AA currently, or 12-step programs currently, because I have nourishment and spiritual fulfillment that comes from all these other directions in my life that I don't. And I also have community. I have community in big time in my life. Like, I'm full. I'm very full in that respect. And so I have those same ingredients that I used to have when I was in the program. And I feel lucky to have created an organic version of that in my life. As you might understand, I see the dark side, and I see how things can go wrong in 12-step programs, and I see the beauty in it. And I have a lot of love and admiration for the program, the creators of it, and for those who dedicate themselves to doing it. So if that's you, good on you. Please if you got something out of this, share it. Share it with somebody who also might get something out of it. And until next time, all the best, everybody.